Dan here. I hope you're doing really well. In this video, I'm going to take you through my YouTube signal chain. Now, I say YouTube signal chain because all the gear I have around me that you can see behind me, all the different basses, that was all bought and set up to do remote online sessions, recording sessions, which I very much do for people all around the world. And so, you know, for just YouTube, it's a little bit overkill. And if you're thinking about your own setup, there's a cheap version of everything. And I'll start with this bass, which is actually a cheap bass. I bought this for around, I don't know, £300, something like that, secondhand. Did it up a little bit, but I wanted a bass for YouTube that is a 4-string and that people can sort of, you know, follow along with. So it starts off, and that's the thing, if you're recording in any situation, it starts off with a bass that you like the sound of, that is set up well. So this is like, it's quite a bright, quite a resonant bass. I'll show you a few others I've got as well. You know, because they do different things. You know, as you know, they all sound a little bit different. But this one's got quite a nice... I keep both pickups on. It's a PJ. We've got DiMarzio DMP126. That's wrong. I never know the name of these pickups. I'll find out. But I have them both on tone up at the same, or you know, all up at the same time. This is the P bass on its own. And this is the J, which is slightly thinner. But I have it set in the middle. Now, in terms of signal chain, very, very simple. The thing I spend money on, I guess, is cables. I've got this Evidence audio cable that I've had for years. It's ultra expensive. You don't need something as fancy as that, but I do recommend that you don't skimp on good quality cables, you know, live or in the studio. I go from that straight in to an Avalon U5, and again, that's an industry standard DI. It's very, very clean, very transparent. I don't put any of the EQ on it. I keep everything completely flat on that, and I've had that for over 10 years now, and it's just such a rock solid DI. Now, I'm not recommending that for you, that just any DI, and what a DI does is it takes the signal and converts it to the signal that your recorder can take, and that's really what a DI does. Some of them color the bass a little bit more. This is a very clean, transparent one. From the Avalon U5. Now, today, actually, just to show you I'll show you the different sort of tones I've got, because I kind of mimic what happens when I record. I'll do a separate video on recording, you know, for clients or what have you. But usually what you'll do in a studio is you'll have a DI, and then you'll come out of that into an amplifier. I don't do that, but I come out of that and I go into this really cool Jules Monique hand-built tube preamp. I love that thing, okay? And when you hear my YouTube videos, I'm either just Avalon or just Jules Monique, okay? Now, let me just show you a few things. So here is the Avalon on its own. Here's the Jules Monique on its own. And here they are together. When I'm doing a YouTube video, I don't really care about the tone too much. I do to a certain level, but I'm not adding any EQ, I'm not adding any compression, I'm generally not adding any effects. It's extremely, extremely simple, tone completely up, you know, both pickups on. What I do from usually is U5, Avalon U5, and then I go into the Universal Audio Apollo. Now, I love Universal Audio stuff because you can put virtual sort of preamps on the inserts, and I use an API, and it's always set to the same thing. Now, this is an important point, whether you're using an amplifier live or anything to record, gain structure is the #1 thing. Okay, so I have volume up completely on this bass. Then all I do is I just set the gain level so that in Logic I'm hitting, you know, just I'm not getting anywhere near the red. You don't want any digital distortion, any clipping. In the live world, if you've got a lovely tube amp, yeah, that sort of saturation point when you get to, when you drive things a bit, sounds lovely. In the digital world, it doesn't. So that really is the main thing, whether I'm, you know, have a cheap bass, don't have a cheap cable, but get a decent cable. You know, whatever you're going into, whether it's, you know, because the Apollo is expensive as well, but you can get cheap versions of all of these things. You have to just get your gain structure correct, so you're not hitting things too hot, too hard. Okay, that's pretty much my #1 tip for recording. Make sure that your bass is set up and there are no buzzes or anything like that, and that you're really happy with the sound of it. You know, just acoustically, just with no volume. And if you've got a nice resonant sounding bass, it's probably going to translate well all the way through the chain. My chain is incredibly simple. Bass, cable, DI. Yes, I know it's a fancy DI, but it's just a DI. Going into, you know, my AD converter. Yes, again, it's a fancy one, but you don't need a fancy one. Really cheap Focusrite stuff. Universal Audio do cheap versions of these, you know, these pieces of gear now. After that, I go straight into Logic Pro X on my iMac, and I know the iMac's expensive, but you can do this on a cheap, you know, you can do this on an iPad, you can do this on a phone these days. None of the chain needs to be expensive. You can see the Monique, I've got a little bit of high and a little bit of low set up there. Usually on the bass, I know this is really, really boring. I don't use any EQ, I don't use any compression, I go flat on the bass. I think the real thing is that the levels are set correctly. So this is up full, and then I just go into the Apollo and I just adjust, and I'm looking at the meters to make sure that I'm nowhere near clipping, and that really, and so actually sometimes I get that wrong, you know, I'm a bit too quick with putting the cameras on, but usually that's what I'm focusing on. Let me show you a couple of other basses. Okay, here's my Zoot Funkmeister, which is a 5-string bass. Now, you know, people say tone is in the hands. It is, and I'll show you something in a minute, but it's also the bass. Basses have different characters. Obviously, we've got a lower extended range here. So I hardly ever use this for YouTube videos because, you know, when people are following along, that 5th B string can be a bit off-putting, but I certainly use this a lot when I'm recording. Now, this bass actually has a little bit of a lower output than the Ibanez, so I just bumped up the gain a little bit, okay? But I kept the levels the same when I'm looking at the meters. Now, what you want to do is you want to play your loudest and make sure that there's no clipping, because dynamics exist in playing. You know, if you're playing really gentle fingerstyle as opposed to strumming or popping, that's going to be a difference. So you want to get your loudest note and make sure that you're well below that dreaded red digital clipping. This is a Lakeland Fretless, once owned by Pino Palladino. Very different character. Again, this is not something I use for YouTube, but if I'm recording, the signal chain is exactly the same. I haven't changed the preamp on the Apollo. You know, I actually didn't change the gain at all. Same cable, same everything. And I just want to show you that really, obviously a different bass has a very different character. Fretless, very obvious that it's got a very different sound to the previous two I showed you. But it's also to do with how you play. You can alter, even on this bass, you know. Whether you play there, or I focus a little bit more on the back pickup, and I move my hands, my fingers a little bit closer to there. We get a bit more of a punchy sound rather than... This is my 1978 Fender Precision. It's very, very mellow. I put well-worn round wound strings on this. You know, if I was doing a rock session or something like that, I'd put bright strings on it, but I like the sound. One split coil pickup here. There's not really much you can do. Volume, tone. You can back some of the tone off to darken it, but it's very dark anyway, you know. You can, to a certain extent, if you use slap technique, if you use different hand placement, if you use a plectrum, then you can get different tones from this. None of that's coming from the signal chain, though. It's from how you play the bass and what kind of tones you choose to get out of it from your hands. But as you can see, my signal chain for YouTube videos is incredibly, incredibly simple. And if you're wanting to, do YouTube videos or record, you can just get really, really cheap versions of everything from the bass to the to the computer, really. So you don't need anything that's as kind of fancy as mine, but just make sure that there's an intention behind this bass being mellow, and the other bass is fretless. It sounds like that. So just think about what kind of sounds you want to create, really, and just know how to use whatever bass you have in terms of tonal controls. This one, there's hardly anything going on. That's why I really like it. It's very simple. If you do have any more gear questions, let me know. You know what, I've got loads of basses around, and I'm going to do a video just taking every single one of them and telling you a little bit about them, why I bought them, a little bit of the history behind them. A couple of people asked me about that, and I think it'd be quite fun to do that. So if you want that video, put a comment below. If you've got any questions, let me know. Thanks very much for watching. I'll see you on the next video.